Hello, everyone. My name is Tina. I'm the founder of Simple Steps Fertility, and I'm so excited today. We have such a wonderful guest, Dr. Sadaf from Umbra Health. She's a mental health provider, and I would like to, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for the time, that you're here. It's so important to talk about these things, and mental health is such an important topic in surrogacy, so I'm so excited. If you would like to just kind of introduce yourself, and we can kind of dive in.
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy to be here. This is my favorite topic ever, so I like when I have opportunities to speak about it. I'm Dr. Sadaf Saidzada. I'm the founder of Ember Health. Ember Health is a mental health care company dedicated to supporting family building. So our hope is to provide supports, resources for intended parents, surrogates, donors, but also the agencies and professionals who are like behind the scenes, who are also um, dedicated to the craft, but definitely still need the support. So that's who I am. And I'm excited to be talking about just the importance of emphasizing and prioritizing those mental health touch points throughout the family building journey. It's been exciting that it seems a little bit more recently we're putting this back in the forefront and putting it as a higher priority to make sure mental health is acknowledged and embraced and supported. So yeah, I'm ready to get in there.
I absolutely agree with you. I think, mental health doesn't get the coverage that it really deserves. And being somebody who comes from working in a, fertility world for almost 20 years, as an agency owner and as a practitioner, mental health really, really is making such a big difference in some of the journeys that we are working with these days with intended parents and surrogates. And, there's the one thing that I want to, I guess, start off with is, of course, we do the psychological evaluations for the surrogates, and that's really important. But I also want to emphasize that we've begun doing psychological evaluations for intended parents. And this is not to, we don't, it's so taboo to talk about this and introduce this idea to intended parents because they feel like they're being judged. But it's basically more of a check in and kind of reassurance and I think managing expectations, I think, in the very beginning. So if you can kind of tell us what you think of the intended parent evaluations and the, joint sessions with surrogates,
Yeah.
why it's important, why you recommend it, that would be great.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's three main mental health touch points on the IP and the donor carrier side when you're starting a journey. And these are ASRM recommended. So these are things that the broader community has seen to be helpful and is recommending that we do. The intended parent meeting, that one I want to start with because that one gets a little fuzzy. We often refer to that meeting as like a psychological evaluation. I think we're used to saying psychological evaluation because that's what the donor and carrier has to do. But the intended parent meeting is not a psychological evaluation. And ASRM language isn't that either. Which I think is really important to highlight because if we can change the language of it, maybe it won't scare so many parents away of like, oh no, you're not going to psychologically evaluate me for nothing. And obviously, like for that reason, they may not want to participate in that kind of meeting. It is a psychoeducational consultation. And it very much feels that way because the intended parent meeting, what it's meant to do is it's meant to capture an intended parent or parents very early in their process, right? Maybe this is before a match, maybe this is before anything's sort of confirmed or solidified, and they're thinking, you know what, I may want to use a donor, I may want to use a surrogate in my family building experience. In that meeting, it's such a wonderful space because you're talking to a mental health provider who's not affiliated with your clinic or agency, who has no vested interest really, who just wants to be sort of this vessel where you can now think about very deeply these short-term and long-term considerations of this family building path. We ask you questions about your history, we ask you questions about your past, but we also relay that to how is this going to work now? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? What happens in this scenario? And we're sort of almost like guides or like emotional coaches that are prepping and priming you to make sure you have all the tools you need to move forward. So there's a lot of value in that intended parent meeting. And this is applicable for a donor or a carrier journey. Oftentimes we see this in surrogacy, but like there's such a value to also having this meeting happen in a donor journey. Um, So that IP meeting, that initial meeting, highly recommend, and it's a consultation, right? So if we could also just reframe it as an industry, we're not telling parents that they need to be psychologically evaluated. I think most of them would be open and into that meeting and want to have a meeting like that. Obviously, for the carrier and donors, we do a psychological evaluation or a psychological screening, and
Mhm.
this is more in depth, right? We are understanding a lot about their history, their background. They take an assessment that tracks different personality and characteristics that are helpful for us when we're reviewing their data. We talk a lot. At least, I'm speaking on the way that we do these evaluations at Ember Health with our donors and carriers, our married donors and all of our carriers have to have a support person join in who's usually like their partner, their family member, their friend, so that we know someone's really has their back
Mhm.
and understands to be supportive throughout the experience for them. We also screen for PTSD. We want to track if there's any sort of trauma history. Trauma is that tricky thing where, like, if it's in your past, sometimes it creeps up. And in pregnancy, it's a very physical experience. We definitely don't want it creeping up in this way or harming anyone in the process. So we look at that person's biopsychosocial history, and then we're also futurescaping with them of like, hey, how is surrogacy going to look in your life right now? How do you think it's going to affect your children and your day-to-day? What happens 5, 10 years from now? Are you going to want to have contact with this person or this future child? And we really want them to think about all of those things. We want them to think about termination, right? We want them to understand if they live in a state that has a very tight laws or non-friendly laws around abortion, that they've thought that through and what that actually means if they're in a position where they have to terminate a pregnancy. So our hope is to give that carrier, that donor, as much information as they need and all of the seeds of thought they need to like sit with, understand, and make the best informed decision for them. And that's sort of our approach with those evals. And then the joint is that third touch point. And the joint is like such an underrated tool for a successful journey. The joint is really where like you can set the stage and create such a strong foundation for your IP or your GC or your donor to have like a positive experience together. And honestly, the joint consultation is a wonderful safeguard for an agency to have that type of meeting happen because a lot gets covered there. In a match meeting, obviously it's sort of like that first date. Everyone's on good behavior. Everyone's saying the right things, right? Like you want to impress the other person and you kind of like each other already. And then at the end of that hour or whatever it is, you're like, let's do it, right? And
Mhm.
so the match meeting has a lot of pressure around it. It's a little bit of a different space. That joint meeting, which ideally the joint meeting happens very close after match, definitely before legal, definitely before things are signed and dotted, but like very closely after match, we want a joint meeting. And that's a space where it's not the agency, it's not the clinic, none of you are there. It's a mental health provider. And I always call this the second date because it is the second date. Like, we like each other, we're matched, cool, let's get in there now. Like, let's really understand what the expectations are. What are our boundaries? What are your preferences? What are mine? Yes, we talked about termination, but what happens in this situation? Yes, we talked about we're going to be open with communication, but what exactly works? Are we going to be texting? Should we schedule calls? And in that joint meeting, at least in our approach, we very much make it like a game plan where we cover all these topics. We talk about social media, we talk about confidentiality, we talk a lot about the things that they're going to see in their contract so that they have some time to think it through, to have open discussions with each other, to be honest. And at the end of the joint meeting, the whole goal is to feel just more connected to each other. And oftentimes that's what happens. And that's a wonderful tool that a mental health provider can add to an agency where it's like you, the agency owner, don't have to have that conversation because you're different anyway. You're someone who's vested in their journey. A mental health provider isn't. So we can have that conversation. We can make sure they have that alignment, and then we hand them back to you, and it's like, hey, they got a solid foundation. This should be okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I really loved how you said you give them seeds of thought.
Yeah.
And I think as an agency, we're providing them with such factual information, and
Yep.
we're trying to discuss so many things in the beginning, especially with both the surrogate and the intended parents, that they're trying to absorb so much information. And I think to give them a moment to connect with these factual things on an emotional level
Yep.
is so helpful. And I think we don't give it enough credit because we don't pay attention, I think, enough as an industry to the emotional aspect of family building through surrogacy and egg donation. To, yeah, of course, we want to have a baby, and we're talking about egg retrievals and medication and injections and timelines. But, what happens after all that is done? What happens when the surrogate is pregnant and you have to find ways of communication and find ways of, building a relationship? It's such a major event in somebody's life. You
Mhm.
trust them to carry your child after, like you said, the first date.
That's it.
You have a match meeting, you have a legal contract, and then somebody's carrying your child. And I think, the seeds of thought and giving them an opportunity to connect emotionally is such an important step in all of this.
Yeah.
Another, topic I really want to get into because, in the beginning, we're trying to do all of this. We'll have the independent session with intended parents and surrogates and give them emotional tools and give them, heads up of what things are to think about and what's going to happen. And then comes the actual journey. And these two parties have to communicate properly with each other. And they want to, form a relationship. But at the same time, they have independent sort of responsibilities. And, intended parents don't realize sometimes the change that actually happens. And so I want, if you can touch on that about communication between intended parents, surrogates, and boundaries, and how do they start to form this relationship?
Yeah. No, totally. Well, I'll go back to the joint because I think that joint consultation is like the secret sauce here. In the joint meeting, at least when I'm doing a joint meeting, a lot of my questions look like, how do we want to start our communication and how do we want to grow it? Are we texting? Are we just sticking to the group text or are we going to plan to call each other? Does it feel good to create something designed or something organic? So I'm setting the stage of like, okay, we're making a plan for communication. In our joint meetings, we're also talking about conflict resolution. And I'm asking them, hey, if something rubs you the wrong way, or you're upset about something that you read or that you're hearing from the other person, how do you want to address that? Are we going to get on the phone directly and talk about it? Do we prefer to have the agency help us coordinate those conversations? What's going to be preferred? So, already in those types of questions and inquiries, we're having everyone build trust with one another in a very slow and small way. And I think that trust piece is like so hard to do in an IPGC relationship because of how fast it happens and like how little information you get before you're really jumping into a big emotional stage. So there's a lot of good seeds that get planted in a joint consultation. But then, like, you're off to the races, like you mentioned. Here's legal, and here's all this unexpected and unknown territory, right? We don't know how the first embryo transfer is going to go. We don't know what's ahead of us. We hope for the best. But for the IP and GC relationship, I kind of, in the joint, I do ask this question as well, and it's a helpful framework. It's like, where do we hope this relationship goes? And do I have a strong feeling in my heart that I want this to feel like a lifelong person for me? Like maybe our futures connect. Maybe we communicate after this. Our kids know each other. Like, is that strong for me? In another direction, is it more like a friendship where, like, with friends, you're kind of focused on the here and now? You're not thinking, oh, in 10 years, me and my friend are going to do this. You're just like right here and you care about each other and you make the time when you can. Is that feeling more organic? And then for others, there's also this dynamic of, like, for lack of a better word, it's like a coworker arrangement where it's like, I care about you and we have a deep, invested interest in completing a goal that is very important to us. And maybe emotionally I can't connect to this. I don't know how I will, but I will do what I can to support you. And that's okay too. There's no wrong version of this. But when you set the precedent of the relationship as early as you can, it kind of helps the rest of it flow. The communication piece is hard because what also is prevalent in a surrogacy and like an IPGC relationship is you have different personalities. And you're not matching on your personalities, right? You're just matching on profiles. The personalities come later. So if I'm someone who's very introverted and I'm not like a big talker and I don't really like talking about my feelings or talking about things, I may or may not be matched with an intended parent in this example that who's like super curious and super chatty and like super extroverted and wants to know all the details of my life and texting me things. And that I won't know in the beginning. I'll have to learn that later, right? And so that personality dynamic is also important and something you kind of see after the fact, where it's like, oh, our personalities are here too. It's not just the profiles. Um, in surrogacy, what we also see that I talk a lot about is you have the intended parents coming into this journey saying, we want to do whatever's going to make her feel comfortable. Like whatever she wants is what we'll do. And then on the other side, you have the carrier who's also saying, I want to do whatever they want. Like whatever makes them feel comfortable. Like I'm okay with that. And everyone's saying that, but like nobody's saying anything, right? Because you're not saying what you want. You're not saying what's going to make you feel comfortable. You're just opening the door and the other person's opening the door, but no one's like inside. And so the hope is in those first few months of that relationship, the encouragement is to be assertive, is to be very communicative. Hey, I'm usually not going to respond within a few hours. It's just not my style. Like I'll definitely get to you by end of day. If you don't hear from me within a day, then, let me know. But I'm not really a quick responder. I'll respond later in the day. Or the other person letting you know, hey, I'm going to be a little bit anxious throughout this experience because I've had a lot that I've also dealt with and been through. So if you're at the doctor's appointment, I'm going to need to know the play by play. Like you're going to need to text me before, during, after. Like that's just, I'm just going to need that. It's that vulnerability that is encouraged very early on to make sure you are learning about each other because you are in real time and to like give permission for that. Um, Someone having like a mental health safety net, if they're offered support sessions or journey check-ins or things like that, these are great ways to capture the journey where it's at and the relationship where it's at and like ebb and flow it a little bit if it's off. But without these kind of check-ins and meetings, I've found that like it's really hard to have an intended parent and a gestational carrier figure each other out in the limited time they have. 9 months is not a long time. And in that 9 months, 9, 10 months when you're pregnant, there's a lot of other stuff going on. You're not like sitting there all day thinking about how do I connect to this person, like that's not your main thing. So very, very assertive, vulnerable communication, and understanding that the other person doesn't know you and you don't know them. So every single conversation is a growing opportunity. It's a learning opportunity. And to approach it that way, I think is the best bet to have a good foundation for communication. That
Yeah,
was long-winded.
no, I mean, it's such an important topic. And so we do have those check-ins, and I definitely think that, as you mentioned, the first conversation should be before signing any legal contracts, having that joint session, planting those seeds, talking about what each person what their expectations are, just to make sure they align correct. As we check during the match call, if their values align, we also want to make sure their communication systems align so
Yeah.
they can kind of be themselves and naturally not force themselves as an introvert to push themselves to be in an unnatural state as a surrogate. And then obviously we encourage another check-in around embryo transfer, and then definitely as we approach the birth and kind of talk about all the things that go on during that time. But let's say worst case scenario, let's say it just the relationship takes a turn. How can we save this relationship? What do you recommend to surrogates or intended parents? Is there a way that we can kind of come back from having a difficult conversation with each other?
I think so. I think when you think about where like connections go wrong, it's also with this understanding that again, you don't know each other well and you're learning in real time. So it's sort of bound to happen where you're going to have this situation. As a carrier, you might have this situation with your intended parents where it's like, "Oh, I didn't like that." And or wow, I don't like these new behaviors that I'm seeing, or I don't like this pressure that I'm feeling. And you're learning all of this in real time because they also don't know you and your preferences either. And so there's a way to kind of redirect when you hit those walls. And at the same time, I also understand that that's just super hard because this is a very emotionally complex space. There's naturally somewhat of a power dynamic with an intended parent and a GC, right? Like there, for oftentimes for a carrier, you're feeling like, yes, of course I'm helping someone, but like it's on me, kind of like they expect a lot from me. I need to be able to do this. I have to get this done for them, and it's sort of this pressure. And from the intended parent side, whether it's overt or not, it's somewhat there too of like, yes, like you need to do this for us, right? Like we're trusting you or hoping that this works with you. So that there's somewhat of a power dynamic, and sometimes that gets a little loud, right? When maybe you have a very anxious intended parent who's like, "What are you doing? Why hasn't this happened?" And
Mm-hmm.
that can be very tense. Um, those mental health check-ins, I think, are the safety nets for these types of misfires. The agency can only be so helpful, right? Because when you think of the power dynamic, the agency is in the mix, but the agency is also the one financially responsible. And you really can't like ignore that piece of it, right? Like the agency wants this to move forward no matter what. And that's sort of the intention that's there. So sometimes when the agency intervenes, when there's been sort of those misfires in relationships, it may not be as effective as a neutral party who's stepping in and is like, I don't know what you're doing. I don't know what you're doing. I don't care. I just want to be here and offer this space to have you all listen to each other, hear what needs to happen, find some guidance, or find a solution. And so that neutral party, I think, is super magical and extremely helpful for those dynamics that misfire. And it's again, it's just creating a space where we don't know each other, so let's get to know each other. What happened here? How did this work for you? How did this feel for you? And vice versa. How does this look moving forward? And then oftentimes when those dynamics happen, it's also just a good sign that like maybe we need to shift this a little bit. The dynamic that we started with or the hopes that we started with based on the journey might need to change. And that's okay too. Like we can have an intended parent and carrier who's like, we love each other, we want to do this, we want to be best friends forever. And, in the middle of their journey or whatnot, things are different. Life is happening for both parties and it's getting intense or complex. And now it's like, you know what, we need to distance ourselves a little bit. Like this is weighing on me or weighing on them. And we redirect, we create a little bit of space for each other for the rest of it. That's all okay, but it is super important to have those spaces where the intended parents and the gestational carrier can say those things out loud instead of holding that in. The carrier would be afraid to say something like that oftentimes in front of an agency or agency person because it's like, I don't want to disappoint them. They believed in me. I don't want to, like, I don't want to make them think that I can't do this. And the intended parent, I mean, some intended parents have no problem telling you that they're upset, right? Because it's like, I trusted you. So like, why is this happening? So when you think of all that too, all of that is in this emotional space. Like if you don't have mental health safety nets in the journey for your IPs or GCs, that's a lot on you as the agency owner, as the agency coordinator, and like, are you equipped for that? Because that's some hard work. And there are people like myself and others who know how to do this work and can be really useful tools for your team.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a team effort, but I do want to agree with you. As an agency, you are trying to advocate for both sides. You're
Yeah.
trying to advocate for your intended parents, but you're also advocating for your surrogate.
Yeah.
And, at our agency, we have a case manager and we also have sort of somebody on the intended parent side, two different people, just to kind of provide that support to advocate properly without conflict of interest for both sides. But sometimes, the saying, when you step back and you are able to take a look at the whole picture, you get to see a lot more than when you're actively part of the situation that's going on. And I think, as, of course, the agency, we're never going to be able to just stand back and see the entire thing as a neutral party because we are in the middle of it. We're just trying to, do conflict resolution. We're trying to give everybody the space and give everybody the ability to voice what will make them happy. But having that layer of mental health support where you know exactly how to speak to somebody to get those hidden emotions out, get those difficult sentences out. You're absolutely right. A surrogate may not want to say something to us because they think we might judge them or it's inappropriate. And so
Mhm.
I really think having that third party, neutral party, being able to address both sides and allow everybody a safe space to just be completely authentic and honest with themselves at some level is really, really important for the entire journey.
Yeah.
As you as an agency with every single journey that we add to our belt, and there's hundreds and hundreds of journeys, we see how much easier, how much more positive, how more emotionally strong both sides are to have a mental health provider from the very beginning and throughout. Not, so I really want to help change that mindset of like, we get the evaluations done in the beginning, the screenings, and you kind of, that's it. But no, it's a team effort. I think we have to work together for the entire journey. And more importantly, you are able to give those communication tools to the intended parents and surrogates to really kind of help each other have a beautiful journey. So,
Right. No, and you're absolutely right. The other part of this that I think is relevant too is like for an intended parent or a carrier, they don't know what they're allowed to say or ask each other. This is like foreign territory. And so sometimes in those mental health spaces, we give them permission or we give them some guidance on like, what do you want to ask? What do you need to know? Because there's nuances. And then throw in like cultural dynamics and throw in different like experiences of pregnancy and such. If I'm working with an intended parent who is from China and her carrier is from Georgia, there are cultural gaps there, and they may be missing each other completely, and not because they want to, because they don't know even how to open a conversation up, right? Culturally, what if one side thinks, well, this would be rude if I said this, so I'm not going to ask that. And culturally, what if the other side was like, they don't talk to me and I want to talk to them more and I feel alone, right? Like there are dynamics there that are so layered. And so the mental health provider can be that person in that space that like calls those elephants out in the room a little bit and is like, yeah, like we're going to have some misfires here because there is something that you're desiring that you don't know if you're allowed to even have. And we could be the ones to guide the conversation and explore, are we going to have that or not? How would this look like? And that's a lot of like the beauty of those mental health spaces. That's the primarily what I like in those conversations is like we are the ones who are allowed to ask them uh, those kinds of inquiries and questions, and it feels like they'll receive it, and it won't be like an uncomfortable situation. I say this because in some examples, when the agency is like bringing up some of those components, again, you're in too close. You're like too deep in, and it is very like a fine line, oftentimes for an intended parent or a carrier, to like see where the agency's on. Is it on my side of the line or their side of the line? Is it truly neutral? And so there's always that question mark, I think, with an agency intervention. But with the mental health intervention, there's it's a very clear distinction. We're not interested in any side. We're just here for the both of you.
yeah, absolutely. I agree 100%. I think um, yeah, you can't advocate successfully for, they don't believe you.
They will not believe you.
As an agency, we are
Yeah,
definitely trying, and it's hard. It's hard to really, because you are trying to, help the other side understand the other side. You have to
yeah,
somehow, you don't want to add fire, gasoline to the fire. You want to kind of help people But that's why communication is so essential, and having transparent communication, free communication, authentic communication, and that I think only comes with a healthcare provider. Just to switch gears before we kind of say goodbye here, because I really want to touch upon egg donation as well, because with the surrogacy cycle, the intended parents, of course, have a 9-month relationship with the surrogates, and they're not carrying but they may have used a donor or not, but the surrogate is going to be able to give birth, and when their intended parents are actually looking for an egg donation cycle, that's sort of a little bit of a traumatic experience for them initially, because initially they now understand that for some reason they cannot use their own egg or sperm, or they have to find an egg donor to be able to complete their family. So it's a little different. You're looking for something different. Now there's DNA that's going to be transferred and shared with your child. So what kind of advice do you have for intended parents that are just beginning that part of their journey, to begin sort of the egg donation and sperm donation process?
Yeah. Oh, it's complex. I don't know if this is advice, but I have considerations. I think there's a big part, so it depends. It depends what you're coming to egg donation or sperm donation for, right? Heterosexual couple with an intended mother or recipient mother, this might be a very different experience than a same-sex male couple who
Mm-hmm.
needs to grow their family. So it really depends what you're coming in with. But the big part of family building through gamete donation is the presence of genetic grief. And in this example, we're going to assume that there is a component of genetic grief. There's a parent who understands that this future child will not be genetically related to them. And for many in that experience, there is a grief component that's very real, right? There's a loss, there's a sadness, there could be a weight in itself from that. Now, a lot of intended parents will hopefully work through those emotions, sit with them as long as they need to before they jump into a decision about gamete donation. But those IP meetings, especially for this, are so, so helpful as well. I do a lot of gamete donation IP meetings, and it's very important to think about this all the way through. Right now, in this very moment of time, as an intended parent, you may be thinking, okay, we're going to move forward with egg donation. But it also is extremely helpful to sort of futurescape, right? Like think of yourself as like a drone who's going to fly over the future. You're not really looking too deep. You're kind of looking over what's in your future. And here are the things that you want to look at. You want to think about like, one, what am I going to tell my future child about their conception story? And maybe that helps you understand where you stand on disclosure, right? Disclosure is a big topic with gamete donation, deciding if this is information that you're going to share with your child or not, when you would share with their child, what you would share with your child. That's a big topic that you want to have thought about before you've gone through and said yes. That alone can help you understand the kind of donor arrangement that's going to be good for you, because there are anonymous donors, there are semi-open donors, there's completely open donation arrangements, and maybe the life that you're seeing for your future child when you sort of futurescape helps you decide what's going to be the best arrangement for you. Um, we also have intended parents glaze over to the future and think, um, what what kind of relationship would this person have with their donor? What do you imagine that would look like? And then beyond that, right, let's keep going. What if you aren't necessarily sharing information about their donor, but they're 18, 19, 20, and they're like, yeah, I want to know who this person is now. And I want to go find them and I want to have coffee with them. You're thinking about like, how will this work? How will this affect your family dynamic? Would this affect you? Beyond that, you're also thinking about, all right, if we're using an egg donor or sperm donor, there's a likelihood that my child may have donor siblings, right? Other people that either this donor donated to or that maybe they um, built in their own biological family. And what's that feel like for me? That my child may have donor siblings in this world or may want to connect with them. There's a donor sibling registry that's been around for decades. They can go on there and find their donor siblings if they wanted to. And so these are big, big things, and they're not in front of you. They're way out in the future. But it is important for intended parents to think about them. And again, like those seeds of thought in that IP meeting, I'm just planting all those seeds, and I need you to go away now and really think on them and really think, what's this look like in the future? How do I want this to look like for my future child? And so those considerations are really important to have up front, um, because there's a child at the end of this. And what we hear and learn about the donor conceived, what we hear and learn from the donor conceived community, right? Those who are donor conceived, there's two large messages that often come out. One is, we wish we knew sooner, right? Don't wait to tell us when we're adults. 18 is sort of like a really awful year to learn about, like, your biological origins when you're already confused about who you are and who you're going to be and what your life is about and all of that. Um, and two, like, we're going to be curious about our biological origins, so don't hide that from us. And that doesn't necessarily affect parentage. That doesn't necessarily change who my parent is or not for most donor conceived people. It mostly is, I want to know who I am and who I connect with in this world. And so, all that to say, those are things that I would think about before going through the gamete donation process. And even if they feel scary, they're not. They're just very important to consider, because you want to have the answers and you want to have these things thought out for your future child. That person gets no choice or decision here, right?
Yeah.
You're the one responsible for that. So you want to have everything ready for them, in the way that you believe will be most benefiting to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so we talked about check-ins for the surrogacy journey, but because the egg donation journey is so short, but it has so much in that short amount
A
of
lot
time
of
that you
weight.
need to, yeah, a lot of
Mhm.
weight. When would you recommend? Of course, I think as soon as you decide maybe this is a route, that would be the first check-in.
Yeah.
When do you think is another good time to check in for intended parents during a gamete donation cycle?
Yeah. The intended parent consultation for surrogacy and for egg donation or sperm donation or even embryo donation, that should happen very early.
Hmm.
Like, they've come to the clinic, they come to the agency saying, this is what I want to do. Cool. Go talk to mental health right now. Right. So that should be happening first, because we can set the stage for them and even set the stage in terms of their expectations. Like, hey, if you are looking for a donor, what's the donor that you're looking for? Are you paying attention to physicality, or are there other things that's going to be important? We can prime them a bit before major decisions happen. Um, and then for known or semi known arrangements, we still want to do the joint consultation with them. We want that second date with them. For a known or semi known arrangement, highly, highly important to also set the stage of, like, what is our relationship going to look like? And what are the boundaries and expectations we need to be clear about right now? With anonymous donation, obviously you don't have access and you can't do that. But the IP meeting for sure. And then in known or semi known, we want everyone back in the room again to talk about what this looks like in the future.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah.
Wonderful. I think I have one last question just to guide some intended parents that have been tackling this issue with our own agency.
Yeah.
We have, in the initial stages of intended parents that have to begin gamete donation cycles, some of the intended, this is more so happening with heterosexual couples where the mother is needs an egg donor.
Yeah.
And one of the concerns she has is bonding with the child. She really wants to. She understands she's going to, carry the child and give birth, and hopefully that process will bring her closer. And what do you think this mother needs to do to kind of prepare for that or tackle this, difficulty that she's having?
Hmm. This is where I, like, bring back this topic of genetic grief, right? Because when you have an intended parent, in this example, if we're talking about a heterosexual couple and it's a recipient mother who understands, hey, I'm not going to be genetically related to my child, and how will this affect our connection? One, I think that's extremely valid to be concerned about, right? Because that's sort of what you think when you think of family building and connection. I'm going to give birth to my child, and of course I'll be connected to them. So when it's not your biological child or biological connection, it's like, oh, then definitely the connection will be a question, right? There's two things. One is, for someone who's fear is really high in that category, it's not fear, it's your grief that's also talking, and your grief is in the room, and your
Mm,
grief is saying, hey, be afraid of the connection. And so the big part about that is you want to spend time with that grief. You want to be not ignoring this genetic grief that comes with building a family through gamete donation. And that's talking about it, that's attending supports for that, which thankfully there are a lot of support groups for those pursuing gamete donation. And I can share those as a resource. It's getting into a mental health space where you can kind of say the bad things out loud, whatever's sort of there weighing you down about this decision. Um, and, it, you know, the grief component is like my biggest stressor. Don't That's grief talking, and we need to talk about grief a lot more when we're talking about family building. The second component is it's also, though it's your grief talking, it's sort of a fear with almost everybody who is about to become a parent that should be generalized and naturalized, where I could be carrying my own biological child and still be worried that I might not connect to parenthood or connect to motherhood or may have challenges connecting to this baby. There are many mothers or carriers of biological children that will give birth and not feel connected to their baby for a little bit. And we'll see this in postpartum anxiety, depression, but like we also see this with just a variety of reasons that happen in your life around pregnancy and the concept of parenthood. It's so lovely to think about, but once you're there, it's like, whoa, what the heck is this? And like sometimes you're just really not prepared for it, and your baby's in the way of that. Like they're all part of this big mess that you have to figure out. And so the second part of it is too that like that is a that is a fear that you're not alone in. This idea of not being able to connect with my child is a fear that goes beyond biological origin.
mm,
And like maybe that can give you comfort, right? Because there are those who have biological connections who still struggle in that area. And maybe it's not connecting to your baby, maybe it be connecting to parenthood, because parenthood's a whole different thing. And so that's okay to have that fear. If it's consuming you and if it's sort of weighing on you, I would say that's the grief. That's actually doing the naughty stuff, the naughty work. It's not the actual fear. But if you take the fear aside, it's not irrational. It's completely rational. And we could be okay with that. We can move forward with that because many people have that fear of not connecting.
mm.
And that's something that you won't be able to dispel until you have the experience.
I'm so happy you mentioned that. I've never thought of it as being grief. Like, I always thought it was fear. So, yeah, it's definitely grief here. It's such a great point.
Thank you. Yeah,
Uh, there's so,
grief is always there.
yeah, there's so much to talk about. There's so many things we can keep going on and on, but I kind of wanted to, really focus on communication today. And, I think the take home message is to really rely on your mental health provider. It's, family building is not just, clinical. It's
Right.
not ABC equals D, or next is D. We really have to really take care of the emotional side of things. And I think the sooner that we, take advantage of all the tools that are available to us with mental health providers, I think the easier the process will be for intended parents, surrogates, egg donors, agencies, everybody involved.
Totally.
So,
And
I really want that to be the take home message today because, I think it's a really big piece of the puzzle that we might not be using enough and giving the opportunity to intended parents and surrogates to be exposed to. So that's really important too.
totally.
So thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for being here with us. I'm so excited for us to continue working together and hope to see you soon.
Thank you, Tina. I loved it. Appreciate you having a space for me to ramble.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye.